As a UU congregation, we operate on two totally different spheres. One, we are a group of people, a covenant body of worshipers, a spiritual community. And two, we're a corporation. As a congregation of people, we do not judge or discriminate against anyone. And I love that we have that value. All are welcome and accepted here. We are a loving, welcoming, and non-judging group. As a corporation, we're quite a bit more discerning than that. When we seek officers for a board position, for instance, we're very careful to look at people's qualifications for that. We may at times very well reject or disregard offers of help from unqualified persons. Not everyone is on the board of trustees or invited to be there. Financial and personnel decisions are also made with a lot of discernment, discrimination, and judgment. Now, in the history of Unitarian churches, these two functions, community and corporation, used to be separate. In early America, in the 17th and 18th century, the people of the church dealt with the spiritual, religious, and community issues, and the regional parish, the town or township, would actually handle the buildings and the finances of the church and other community buildings. That included all the buildings and the church's collections and finances. Now, can you imagine what it would be like if the Pima County Board of Supervisors got to handle our budget and our property use? Only in the early 1800s were congregations finally allowed to incorporate and administer their own funds and own their own property. And while this change was generally seen as very positive, since it certainly empowered congregations to decide about property uses and finances, there was a downside. The conflict of interest and values came into play at times. At times, the goals and values of the corporation may be quite different from the goals and values of the minister or the congregation. Also, since we accept everyone, a congregation could at times be overrun by individuals who had totally different values and purposes, and who would then change the way buildings and funds were used, and the church would take a totally new direction. I remember one conflict we had a few years ago. We found out that a new member who had identified himself as having an alternate sexuality was not gay or bi or transsexual, as I had presumed. He told us he was not ageist in his sexual orientation. Basically, he turned out to be a pedophile who had already begun approaching adolescents in our community. Now, where does that leave us as a welcoming congregation? We sure had value conflicts here, didn't we? On one hand, we had the value to welcome each individual. But when it came right down to it, we also valued the safety of our children. More than that, this bind didn't feel good. It actually reflected these two spheres of the church, didn't it? As a spiritual community, we welcome anyone. As a legal corporation, we need to limit liability and make sure all behaviors on premises are lawful and safe. Those are two very different values and purposes. As a legal entity, the Board of Trustees can limit what kind of behaviors are allowed here so that our members are kept safe from harm and our congregation is legally protected. That is what was called for in this incident. Luckily, this individual did not like us even questioning these behaviors and disappeared quite willingly from our community. The board did not need to take any legal action at that point. But in the process, we were accused by him of excluding someone because of their sexuality and sexual preference. And that was a tough blow for a welcoming congregation like ours. By the way, this person was given appropriate referrals to get help and support from professionals on their way out. Have you ever had a value conflict in your personal life, your professional life, or even in the life of this congregation? I have those all the time. It can be something very minor, like, will I be on time or will I drive the speed limit? My value. A few years ago I stopped speeding, so I know which one I usually choose these days, but it can be a tough one. Sometimes these decisions are more far-reaching or important. For instance, I believe in ethical eating. I love the fact that the Unitarian Universalists have a strong ethical eating movement which emphasizes treating the earth and all its inhabitants well, no matter what their species. When I started attending here, I had been a vegetarian for many years, and I was excited to find others like me in this congregation. Eating that way matched my values. No problem. But then my body changed. Suddenly I could not digest soy, actually not any beans or legumes or dairy or wheat or most vegetables. The list of food intolerances went on and on. After a year of living on a very limited diet, still being quite uncomfortable, I had a tough choice to make. You see, in addition to ethical eating, I had another value as well. I wanted to have a healthy body. And I wanted to have my body feel comfortable enough and be pleasant enough around others to be socially acceptable. Constant stomach cramping and bloating did not work for me long term. So here I was with conflicting values, self-care or ethical eating. I weighed these for many months. I finally decided to eat meat again. I'm limiting myself to mostly poultry, and I don't want to eat beef. But it's been 3 years now since I gave up on my vegetarian lifestyle, and part of me still grieves that I cannot be true to my ethical eating standards and beliefs. But I weighed the two values, and I did make a choice, and that was an important process for me. In some way, it does not matter as much which value we finally decide to go with and what choice we end up making when we have such a conflict. Either decision will be good, because it will match an important value of ours. I like the quote from the novelist J.A. Jans. It sounds like one of those times where you have two choices, both of them right and both of them wrong. The important step here is to consciously examine the conflict. Find the conflicting values, weigh them, and then purposefully decide. If we do not address the issue directly, because it's too darn complicated, we will continue to have this inner conflict, and our actions will continue to evoke feelings of guilt and a sense of discomfort. Exploring this value conflict consciously is a challenging and uncomfortable process, but well worth it. This is also true for our communities. If there are value conflicts in our family, our community, our congregation, they need to be addressed. Once they are spoken out loud and a decision is made, we can then let go of the guilt and know that while we are not true to all of our values, we have considered them all and we're true to many of them and have chosen our highest priority values to guide us. Let's hear another example of value conflicts in our community this past. Margaret, come share with us.
One of the minor personal conflicts that I deal with regularly is that between being thrifty and getting the best value for my money and being environmentally responsible by buying organic produce. Sometimes one value wins out and other times the other. But what I want to talk about this morning is a situation we had in our congregation several years ago, which exemplified a fundamental conflict between two of our UU principals. It involved a young couple in their 30s, whom I'll call Bonnie and Bill, and an older man whom I'll call CJ. CJ had been a member of the congregation for a long time. He was well liked by everyone, although he held social and political views far to the right of most of us. In keeping with our UU policy of accepting diverse views, most of us tolerated his without really taking them very seriously. The problem began when a letter of CJ's was published in the church newsletter. In it, he tried to point out that women often complain about sexual harassment, but that men too could be victims of it. For example, by women dressing seductively, teasing, and refusing sex. The letter was clumsily written. CJ wasn't a very articulate writer, and it probably came across as more negative than he intended. He had recently gone through a painful divorce, which no doubt affected his opinions. Bonnie and Bill were relatively new members. Like many of their generation, they had joined partly because they wanted religious education for their daughter. And they believed that ours was a congregation of like-minded people. They were both full of positive energy and had quickly become valued participants in our community life. When Bonnie read CJ's letter, she was appalled. She complained to several people, but what she heard was, in effect, "Oh, that's just CJ. He has some strange views, but he's a good person." Bonnie pointed out that often molesters and rapists are described by their acquaintances as nice, friendly men who would never be thought of as possible sex offenders. She was convinced that he was dangerous. At this point, Bill got involved. He wrote a letter to CJ and distributed copies of it to the congregation on Sunday morning. In it, he pointed out that rapists often use statements such as CJ's to justify their actions. The notorious, she was asking for it, defense. Feelings were running high, so members of the congregation were invited to stay after the service to discuss this matter. At the meeting, Bonnie again reiterated her position that CJ was dangerous, that a man capable of expressing such sentiments was capable of acting on them, and she wouldn't feel safe being alone in the same room with him or having her daughter in the same room. She said she considered his public statements to be a form of sexual harassment within the meaning of the act. She also revealed that she had been a victim of sexual harassment and abuse in the past, a fact that no doubt heightened her sense of violation. Some members vehemently supported CJ's right to express his opinions as consistent with our UU principle of the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Others believed that his sexist opinions violated our UU principle of respect for the worth and dignity of every individual. Two deeply held idealistic beliefs were at cross purposes with one another. How could they be reconciled? Could they be reconciled? Some people in the congregation were afraid of losing CJ, a long-standing and highly valued member. Others didn't want to lose Bonnie and Bill because their youth and energy were much needed. In the event, we lost all three. Bonnie and Bill resigned publicly at the meeting, and CJ resigned a few weeks later, saying he no longer felt comfortable with the direction the congregation was going. Sometimes it's easy with hindsight to see what could have prevented a tragedy. I still can't see what we should have done to prevent this one.
Thank you, Margaret. What a great example of conflicting values. This seems like a difficult challenge, almost like an insurmountable problem. In some way, it's actually quite simple. When we look at the two spheres of a church, as people, as a spiritual community, we welcome anyone, regardless of their views or opinions that they might hold and share. As a corporation, we carefully choose to select volunteers to represent and protect us. We would not accept somebody as a predator, for instance, who cannot do math or has recent fraud convictions. We will also not publish badly written prejudicial material without editorial comment in our newsletter to represent our corporation to its members and to the community at large. You see, the newsletter is an important communications arm of the corporation and needs to therefore reflect our values. It's not a free-for-all. The corporation decides on our PR and controls the public image. Editing is not only allowed, it's actually crucial. So where does that leave the freedom of free speech? If a person insists on publishing a potentially derisive viewpoint, the editor, on behalf of the board and corporation, could postpone publishing it until other viewpoints on the same topic and subject are collected and could then be published together, therefore representing our diversity in our community. And that would, again, represent our values much more accurately. That way, we're not misrepresented to the public, as was the case in Margaret's unfortunate example. Now, these examples may bring back some memories for you, and not the fondest ones, I'm sure. And they may make you quite uncomfortable. Good. Discomfort is actually the best motivator for change. And here we are at the beginning of a new year. It is easy to look at a list of resolutions and dreams for 2012, and I hope you do. Our odds of achieving them, however, depend largely on our self-knowledge and willingness to work on our issues, which may affect the achievement of these wonderful goals. Finding and examining our values and seeing how they might conflict is an essential preparation for a successful year. Finding the courage to explore which of our values are indeed the highest priority ones, and then taking action and making that empowered decision, that will allow us a great chance of success. This is a great year we are beginning, 2012. It is a powerful year for our congregation and our country. We will make a choice regarding the settled minister in just a few months. And then a few months after that, we will have a national election. Who knows what else awaits us, personally, as a country, or as a UU congregation.